Good evening, everybody. This is Carolyn Jacobs with WGBH Education. We really appreciate you spending part of your evening with us for what I think is a very rich presentation, Climate Impacts and Sustainability, Drought Stories and Solutions. We are recording. We will send out the recording link along with other information in a follow-up email that will probably not go out until Monday. But in the meantime, you are welcome to download a document that appears at the bottom right of your screen in the file square. I misspelled the word climate, so you'll see that it's called ClimCate Change Webinar Resources. So if you download that document, in there are many links to resources that we'll be highlighting tonight, as well as a link to the slides and also a link to the survey. We ask that you complete a survey, very brief, letting us know what we did well, what we could improve on, etc. And if you would like a certificate of participation, we do ask that you complete the survey, and then we will send out those certificates in a few days. It takes us a little while. We're going to keep the survey open through the beginning of next week, and then we'll work on getting the certificates out to you. All the attendees are muted, so we're reserving the mic just for the presenters so we don't hear any background noise. But we do encourage you to post questions and chat with each other and the presenters in the chat box, and we should have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So I am going to, I just wanted to mention that this session is sponsored by WGBH out of Boston and PBS LearningMedia. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Conley, Director of STEM here at WGBH, and she'll introduce the speakers and get us started. Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you everyone who is joining us tonight. We have some tremendous resources for middle and high school teachers that we are really looking forward to sharing with you tonight. So hopefully you will leave this session with lots of new materials and ideas that you can bring to your classroom right away. So tonight we're going to start with a very brief introduction to PBS LearningMedia so that everyone here is oriented to where you can find the materials we're going to share. Then we are going to be joined by Dr. Tamara Ledley, who is going to give us an overview of some climate change impacts and some of the science behind it. And then we're going to tour the drought resources that we're going to focus on tonight, which has a really great combination of case studies and stories that lead into solutions. Then we have Eric from Arizona, who is a teacher joining us to talk about how he implemented these materials in his classroom and what his experience was with his students. And then we'll have some additional climate resources to go over with you before we discuss the professional development certificate information at the end. And there will be plenty of time for discussion and Q&A with any of our presenters. So please feel free to use the chat box during, or you can hold your questions to the end where we will have time to address anything you might want to ask. So with that, I am going to switch over to the live site very quickly and just give you two pages I want to orient you to. So when you go to pbslearningmedia.org, this is the page you will see. Now, I am in Massachusetts, and you will see it as localized to me in Massachusetts, but I would like to show you over here on the right where you can see it says Rachel. I am logged in, and if you are not logged in, I would recommend you might consider making an account and logging in to give you access to favoriting and assignments and other types of resources that you can only gain access to when you are logged in. So I just want to let you know that I recommend you doing that if you do not already have an account. And the resources we're going to look at tonight, I'm actually going to show you how to get to them. So here in the search box, I'm literally going to put the word drought, and I'm going to search for the word drought, And I'm going to scroll down here and click on the resource type collection. And the very first collection you see here is Climate Change Impacts and Solutions, Drought. When I select it, this is the collection of materials that we're going to be featuring tonight. At the end, we will talk about some others, but this is the focus of tonight's instructional experience. The resources themselves, you will see there are multiple ones, and I will give you a tour in depth after we have our introduction from Tamara. So I am going to switch back over and stop sharing, and I'm going to start with a piece of media from this collection. We like to say that we go from stories to solutions in this lesson plan. And this is one case study from California, and it is only 3 minutes that we'll show you of a longer video, but it gives you a taste of the kind of stories, the real world, everyday experiences that are a key part of this lesson and this collection of resources. Carolyn, as Carolyn said to some of you early on while you were waiting, if you are on an iPhone or an iPad or tablet device, you might not or will not see this video for the next 3 minutes. It will be in the recording, and there's nothing wrong. We will be back in 3 minutes, so please do not panic if you don't see this video. For the rest of you, I'm going to hit play now, and this will be 3 minutes long.
And with it much of the herd's future. But the bigger story, the reason we've come to Delano, is what's happening all around the ranch. The California drought is entering its 4th straight year, a drought some fear could become the most costly in the history of the American West.
We've got good years and bad years. This is, I call it, worse years. This is really bad.
Matt's boss, ranch owner Jesse Ravilla, says despite his best efforts, the remaining herd is losing weight, but feeding them is breaking him. How long can you keep that up?
Well, that means I got to go sell some more cows. I got to sell more cattle so I can buy more hay.
So the herd gets smaller and smaller.
And I'm getting poorer and poorer.
California reservoirs, once pictures of abundance, are more alarming than reassuring. This year, the hottest ever recorded in California, water levels fell so low that authorities had to cut off water to most farmers, meaning farmers had to use well water or lose everything.
If you didn't have a well, what would have happened to your trees?
Well, they would be half dead by now.
2 miles from Main Street, Mary Andreas joined hundreds of farmers now drilling for water. Mary grows 84 acres of almonds. Her trees require year-round water to stay alive. 6 months before her water allotment was cut off, Mary mortgaged her home, plunked down almost $200,000 to drill a well. It saved her farm.
How hard was that decision?
It wasn't hard because we had already invested so much. We can't stop now. We don't know what's going to happen next year or the other, but we have to keep going forward because we got everything, our whole life invested in this 84 acres.
Which is why farmers like Mary, who can afford it, are drilling more wells than ever. Drilling crews are arriving from across the West, adding to local drillers who can't keep up with the demand.
If we want to drill a well on our farm, how soon could you do it?
We're anywhere from 8 months to a year and a half behind.
But more worrisome is that so much water is being pumped from underground to replace water lost in this drought that few people believe it can be sustained. Wells are going dry, and drillers are forced to go deeper to find water. This well, located 16 miles from Main Street, is headed down 1,600 feet, 350 feet deeper than the Empire State Building is high.
To what extent do you feel like we can only punch so many holes and pull out so much water before we really start seeing huge problems?
Well, I mean, we're to that stage right now, I think, because the deeper you go on some of this, you're losing out on water quality too. You're going to get down so deep and the water going to start getting salty on.
Okay, so that will give you a taste of some of the stories and case studies that are included in this lesson. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tamara Ledley, to talk about what some of these climate impacts are.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So I'm going to talk about what the impacts are of climate change. I'm first going to talk about on this slide the direct impacts. What are the changes in the Earth system that are responding to the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere? So as we get, the Earth has a natural greenhouse effect that makes the Earth livable as we know it, where life evolved. But the increase in greenhouse gases has caused the infrared radiation, that heat coming up from the surface of the Earth, get trapped in the atmosphere and get re-radiated back down, so that causes increases in temperatures. That's one direct effect. Others are more extremes in storms. Warmer temperatures feed storms and make them stronger, so that there are more extreme storms, and the result of that can be flooding. And also the increase in temperatures really invigorates the water cycle, and so you can have extreme amounts of evaporation producing drought. Those dry conditions as a result of drought can produce wildfires like we've seen in the western part of the country this past year. And then another direct effect is those increases in temperature cause both water to expand, ocean water to expand, causing sea level to rise, and also causing the ice sheets that are on land to melt, and that also contributes to sea level rise. And so some of these pictures here are just depicting some of these things. On the top is some pictures of a reservoir taken from the resources we're talking about tonight, showing the effect of drought on the reservoir. On the right is the increase in precipitation, the vast amounts of precipitation that occurred in Hurricane Harvey as it got stuck over the Texas coast. And then on the left is the extreme flooding events that can and heat that can occur in Boston. So, but then we're going to look at the indirect impacts of climate change. So those direct impacts have a vast array of impacts on a lot of different parts of our society. One of them is on health. Disease carried by insects and death due to extreme heat, or just a couple of the kinds of indirect impacts that climate change can have on health. Certainly energy is impacted in the sense that there's this tension between the use of fossil fuels, which contributes to additional climate change, versus renewable energy resources. Transportation is also another area that is impacted. The tension between the use of gasoline-powered cars and electric cars. Also, mass transport, it can be impacted. If trains are using tracks that are close to the coast that are impacted by rising sea levels, that impacts the transportation infrastructure. Water supply and water quality are also quite impacted. Waterborne diseases increases the temperature of the water increases. Also contaminated water due to increases in algal blooms in the oceans. As I've also mentioned, infrastructure can be impacted. I talked about the potential impact on transportation, but also as sea level rises, it impacts buildings that are built along the coast, and how to deal with that. Then food supply is also impacted, and we have a picture up here to the right, the impact of drought on the crops in that particular picture. Then on the bottom we have a picture of what's called nuisance flooding. Basically, this is flooding of the middle of a town during high tide. It's not even a storm that produces this flooding, and yes, there's sandbags in front of the door of that little shop to keep the water out. So that's an impact on the economy. But in this particular discussion, we're going to be focusing on drought. Now, one aspect that you need to think about is that drought doesn't have an exact definition, because really drought is a change in the amount of water that's available compared to what is the normal condition there. So aridity is the normal dry conditions in a particular region, and drought needs to be measured against that normal. And so the graphic on the right is one from California. And you can see those red bars there are the 30-year average rainfall. The rainfall in 2013 in this particular graph shows that during the wet seasons in the winter, the amount of rainfall was very much diminished. And it obviously, even though it looks like in June, July, and August, the amounts of rainfall were actually exceeded what the average rainfall was. That was a drop in the bucket compared to what was lost during the rest of the year. You need to really consider that in the context of the local environment. But then looking at impacts of drought, the severity of the drought determines how far-reaching the impacts can be. So meteorological drought is really the first stage of drought. It's when the amount of precipitation is somewhat lower than what it would normally be over an extended period of time. But that can lead ultimately to agricultural drought, in which the amount of precipitation begins to affect the crops that are in a particular region. As you move further, hydrological drought impacts is when the severity of the drought is such that it impacts the amount of water available for everyday living. And then socioeconomic drought is even further, it goes even further that where it actually affects the economy of the communities that it's impacting. So that's the range of drought as it builds from a rather mild situation to a very intense situation. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel now, who is going to talk about the use of telling stories and looking for possible solutions, in particular scenarios where these stories describe. So Rachel, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Tamara. And Tamara will be with us so that if you have further questions at the end, please feel free to ask her. So the thing about this experience that we've put together, this instructional experience and this lesson and these resources, was the importance to focus on real, on-the-ground, everyday, local stories, and then lead from that into an exploration of the science and the data from NOAA and NASA and our content partners into a solution space that students, particularly middle and high school students, really appreciate, because it leads them from a place of what's happening to what is possible and how to explore that in the lesson. So I'm going to move back over to the screen share, and I'm going to go back to the live site and briefly show you where you can find these materials and what to focus on. So I'm now in the collection of materials that I think Carolyn has put a link in the chat box and can do it again, that includes everything you need, including the case study video that we just saw. When you get to this site, you'll see as you scroll down that there are multiple resources within it. I want to highlight the very first one on the page is a lesson plan. You can see that this is the lesson plan itself. When you open the lesson plan, you can, there's many pieces, and I want to just orient you to it. The overview, which is where you start, gives you all of the materials you need here in terms of the links to the handouts. These are the worksheets for your students, and the multimedia resources that you're going to use, including here you can see the drought case study for California. There's one for Texas, Cape Town, as well as other resources you need. But everything you need is included in this one lesson plan. And under the procedure, you will see the explicit step-by-step process, and then under support materials, you will again see the handout. So this is the lesson plan that is where you would want to start and explore and see what pieces of it you want. The other materials within this are the media-based resources, and I'm going to go to the California drought one right here to give you a sense of how deep all of these resources go. Oh, apologies. I don't know how or why I just lost my page, but I did. Oh, there I am. Can you see this again? Okay. Here's my case study. When you go to this video-based resource, you can see how you can click and watch, and this is the video we saw a clip from. And then if you select the support materials, every media resource has a background reading, handouts for your students, which are the same handouts you would use in your lesson plan, the teaching tips, and discussion questions. So all of these materials are included here, and I am now going to turn it over to Eric because he is going to share with us how he used these materials in his classroom and with his students and how they responded. So Eric, do you have, let me give you control of the slides now, and I'm going to get you right to where you need to go. There you go, Eric.
All right, thank you. So to give a little background for my school and Tucson in general, we're the second largest city in Arizona with almost 1 million people. It's a dry heat out here. Our average rainfall is 11 inches and temperatures bump up into the 110s at least 10 times a year. Tucson High is the largest school in the city. We're walking distance from downtown, so it's our version of urban. 50% of the students qualify for free and reduced school lunch, and we've been under a DSEG order for over 40 years. That actually helps us with some funding issues, so we have laptop access for all of our students, and we just roll them in, and that's what I use for getting everybody access to the resources. Now, making everything relevant got a lot of buy-in from the students. By bringing up the water issues, it really helped my students engage deeply with it because it is an issue that we have out here. We get a lot of rain all at one period of time in the summer, and then it stays dry for months and months. So just kind of starting out, I had to ask them how we define things like drought or where our water comes from. And there's even at 14 and 15 years of age, there was a lot of misconceptions in there that we had to work through. Because we have, for the lack of water, just a bunch of trees. You can even see in the picture a lot of very good desert-adapted plants. So thinking about the specific impacts had to bring it into a really tight focus for them. Now, water was our hook. This is one of the NOAA drought maps, and you can see Tucson's in southern Arizona. We're kind of an orange-red region for, that was April of last year, so this time last year. And the students understood what heat and aridity would do to things, shriveling up plants, but they really didn't understand what drought was because it's just always kind of dry, and more dry was a difficult concept. And they also had a shifting baseline problem because we have gotten more dry and more hot in the Southwest in their lifetimes, but they wouldn't remember the very beginning when it was a little bit nicer out here. So to set up the class for it, I did the drought basics slideshow and talked them through it and broke them up into groups and had each group watch some of the videos. It was a little bit of a jigsaw effect. So they all got to see one case study at first and then share some ideas with each other. And I kept all of the resources linked up on a class website, and I have district grading tools that I used for turning in assignments for everybody. They had an option of writing stuff down or typing it up. And I've used some of the PBS LearningMedia resources before, and there's a good turn-in feature there. I just can't enter my grades in at the same time, and I'm a little jealous of everybody who can integrate it with Google Classroom or Schoolology. Now, we do have a fair percentage of ELL students, and the handouts didn't take really any extra scaffolding or differentiation for the different needs. You can see here I brought in a student whose English skills weren't quite perfect, little bit extra talking through because they really are excellent resources for graphic organization. And the students handled it quite well. So they watch the video, describe evidence of drought that you observe, and they can understand that the city's, plants are dying out. And as we were going through it, there were a lot of discussion questions that brought up issues that my students really did not know was a thing. One of the possible solutions that was presented was an atmospheric water generator. And because they all had laptops out, they look it up. And this is something that, if you read the fine print, would make 2 to 5 gallons of pure water a day. And in a place with almost 0% humidity most of the time, it would make no water a day. Our cold soda doesn't even get sweat droplets on the outside for half of the year. So the students saw that there's a device that costs almost $3,000 that would barely satisfy a personal drinking amount of water. And it really led to discussions of cost and scale and brought in, obviously some math skills, but also availability and some social justice ideas. The success of assignments really did encourage deeper domain of knowledge answers from the students. This is one of the other worksheets in some of my student work, where they're thinking about the different existing solutions and they had to come up with their own criteria to evaluate the effectiveness of the solutions. So something like a desalination plant would be really quite good, but incredibly costly, where cutting down to about 6 gallons of water per day per person is virtually free, but it really kind of hit their fairness buttons as they were going. And it really sets up some extrapolation ideas for the students as time goes on. Which brings us to kind of an interesting, ironic twist. This has been an unusually wet spring season in Tucson. This is one of our 2 usually dry riverbeds, the Rito, and you can see there's about 4 inches of water in it right in this picture. And we had not just rain, but some snow on our nearby mountains, and there's snow melt, and the river is still running a couple weeks later after all of the precipitation, which when I was their age was something that happened not too infrequently, but this is the first time we've seen running water for more than a couple days in a row in well over 10 years. So we're talking to the students about drought during an unusually wet time, and they all took the chance to go out and check out what was going on. We also got to use some of the extra resources that aren't included in the lesson plan. The urban temperature divide section was very interesting to them because, again, Tucson came up on the list. So we got out some infrared thermometers and went and did just little experiments checking to see what would be hotter as a surface, like some of the plants that we have in the school area or the concrete. And it started to give the students a feeling that they could do something about it after what was kind of a bummer of, seeing all the cows losing weight and crops dying. Because we have some resources in Tucson with the University of Arizona. There's some people called Project Wet that are trying to give students some ability to do rainwater harvesting so they get to apply math and engineering skills to try to trap some of the precipitation on campus and grow some trees, get us some shade that's going to help with the temperature problem, and really take this from just sitting back and learning to getting them doing something kind of exciting with all of the material. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel.
Thank you, Eric. And Eric is going to be with us for Q&A too, so if you have any other questions about adaptations or what he did, we really would welcome you to speak to him teacher to teacher. I'm briefly going to touch on a couple of other resources we have on PBS LearningMedia that address climate education and climate and sustainability issues that some of you have already probably experienced, but I want to start by teaching you sort of how to fish rather than before I give you some of our other specific examples. When you go to the main PBS Learning Media website, you can select the subject up here at the top in red. I've circled it, or I should say put a box around it. And then you can go right to the science section and select Earth and Space Science. When you do that, you can browse into, this is what you will get, and you can browse, you'll notice all of these subtopics are aligned, are sort of precision aligned with the next generation science standards. And I've called out two sections that you might want to explore, the human impacts on Earth systems or weather and climate. When you select either of these, you will get the selection of resources on the right in the window, and I always like to sort by popularity, which really sort of surfaces the best and most used materials. And then once I sort by popularity, you can filter by grade or type of resource. But this is really how to get to a range of materials in climate and human sustainability. And now I'm going to feature and show you a couple of very specific materials that I think that are some of our newest and best that we're particularly proud of. The Bringing the Universe to America's Classroom project, which is a partnership with collaboration with NASA, has developed K-12 materials that every grade band, and you can see here I've selected grade 3 to 5 as an example, but every grade band has a weather and climate collection of materials in them. So I hope that you'll explore this collection, and I think Carolyn just put the link in the chat box. Another collection that's very recent, and some of you I know from a previous webinar were on a webinar about this. This is called The Last Generation. This lesson plan and interactive documentaries from Frontline and the Ground Truth Project looks at the voices of 3 different children on the Marshall Islands who talk about the past, present, and future and what it's like to grow up in a place that is disappearing, in this case due to sea level rise. So this is a powerful lesson that has a lot of civics, social studies, and science engagements all knitted together, and also is very story focused. So if you like the resources and the stories you see tonight, I also recommend you check this particular resource out as well. This is a brand new interactive lesson from NOVA, and an interactive lesson is something that you can assign your students to do on their own, independently, or in small groups, that can take a class period or potentially longer. And it's called Choosing Earth's Climate Future, and this is a really amazing experience that is from a recent program from NOVA called Decoding the Weather Machine. And it really also looks at adaptation and mitigation strategies and the evidence for really what communities are facing. So I recommend you checking this out as well. For diverse perspectives and stories of people who are really on the front lines of climate impacts, we have 2 collections of materials, one from the Pacific Islands and another one from Alaska Native perspectives, both about climate change impacts. And it's a good juxtaposition, and you might want to look at both or have students assigned to one or the other. But we would recommend you checking this out too if you're looking for more diverse stories from around the globe. And close to Eric's home in the West, we have this final collection of materials called Beyond the Mirage, which is a film about the future of water in the West that some of you who are in the Southwest or the West might find particularly local and relevant. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Carolyn to tell you about the Professional Development Certificate and the recording in that and what's next. And then we will open this up for Q&A. So if you have questions, please get them ready for the chat box. And Carolyn, would you like to take it from here?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you to Eric and Tamara. Yeah, we have a survey. The link is here. I'll also put it in the chat box, and it's also on the document that you can download at the bottom of your screen in a box called Files. In that document are also links to the resources that we've been showcasing and that I've been putting into the chat box. The survey is very quick. We ask you about your experience tonight, ask you for some recommendations. If you would like a certificate of attendance at tonight's webinar, we do ask that you complete the survey, and we will issue those certificates. They will come to you as an attachment to an email, and they will be issued a few days after the survey closes, which is next Tuesday. So in addition to that, I would just say that we'd love you to follow us on social media. You see our various handles right here. And we do run a lot of webinars, and one way to guarantee that you don't miss anything is if you do sign up on PBS LearningMedia, and Rachel mentioned that in the beginning. Of course, sign up on the site is free, easy, and signing up allows you to use the site to the maximum, giving you access to features of downloading video, saving things to folders, sharing folders, having your students save their work and interactive lessons, etc. So that is it. So I'm going to turn it, Rachel and Eric and Tamara, if you scan through the chat box, I think you'll see there may be some questions that you can address, or there might be some new ones.
Yes, I'm doing that right now.
And I'll just add, Rachel, I'll put, maybe we'll switch to the next slide. My contact information is there, and you are welcome to email me anytime. I will pass along your email to the right person if I'm not able to help you. We do offer in-school trainings and demonstrations of PBS LearningMedia if you are in Massachusetts, and if you're interested in that, let me know, and we'd love to hear from you. Okay.
Great. We're looking to see if anybody is writing. We have some new questions here. Is the drought in California indicative of a shift in climate patterns? I think that's a question for you, Tamara.
The locations of droughts will vary with time. However, those areas such as California and Texas are ones that are more prone to severe drought. So I think that they are going to just increase in frequency over time, as long as our trajectory with increasing temperatures and greenhouse gases continues.
And I would just like to add, there is a resource in the collection, and if you don't mind, I'll just turn on the screen share and show it to you live, that does include projections. I'm here on the live site now. You can see right at the top. I'm scrolling down, Drought Data and Projections resource. Here includes 3 videos. And if you can see here, there's one here on the right, the third one, U.S. Drought Projection Model. This is a projection from NASA, if you can see it. It actually does show future projections to 2095.
And you should differentiate these kinds of projections from weather forecasts. They are different because they call them purposely projections rather than forecasts, because they're just generalized conditions. And I think for the drought, they talk about being wetter than normal or drier than normal. They don't tell you how much precipitation there really is going to be or how little there's going to be.
Okay. Thank you, Tamara. So I just wanted to call that out to everyone that there is a projection in the drought data in one resource. Okay. In New York, we are looking, let's see, are there any videos available? Oh, any information specific to New York State or the Northeast region? We do not have a case study that is specific to the Northeast region. However, the generic type of material, the generic type of story that we include here is something that you might be able to find in the New York region in news or other local news stories. So we are hoping that students might be able to find and look up what their own localized stories might be.
I think one of the, as you get into the materials, it wasn't, but one of the things is there's a list of potential solutions, and part of the exercise for the students is to evaluate which one will work in the local context they're considering. So you can then, as Rachel said, have the students then, once they've explored a region where we have an in-depth story, to then try to translate, well, if we had a drought where we live, would this solution work, or would there be something that would cause it not to work?
So I have a question here about the videos being available via YouTube or an open resource site. So PBS Learning Media is an open and free video resource site that you can have your students watch, or you can even download the videos from them for free. So there is no requirement to sign on or do anything special to watch these videos. So you can send your students direct to PBS Learning Media just like you could to YouTube. I hope that answers that question.
I see that there's one comment about the snow in the Pioneer Valley, the decrease in snow. Causes there not to be enough water in the rivers during the summer, even when they have a lot of rain, and that's a quite accurate observation. The snowpack actually keeps the liquid, the frozen water in place to be released. It's almost like a time release situation, so that then you get the water is available in another time of year. When you have a big rainfall, it falls and then it either sinks into the ground or it washes away right away, so it's not available for later in the season. That's why the snowfall amounts are particularly important.
Great, thank you. So we hope that you will start with a lesson plan and select pieces or individual resources from there. We've made this very modular and very flexible. And if you use these, we would love to hear from you. We started with drought as an important issue, but we do hope over time to be able to create stories and solutions for other climate impacts beyond just drought. But that depends on hearing from you about how this works and if you enjoy this approach. Okay. We're looking at if there's any other questions. Oh, Eric, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was actually going to address Mad's question about helping to change the rhetoric as somebody who's lived his entire life less than 60 miles from the border. That seeing people come through, it's always been a simple economic issue. And the rhetoric that gets passed around in Washington has always baffled us down here.
Thank you. We appreciate the fact that we had a teacher join us tonight who is very much in the red and orange region of that map and knows the day-to-day and has been, you've lived there most of your life, correct?
Yep. Tucson has been my home for 40 years almost.
Great. Well, thanks again, Eric, for joining us tonight and using these with your class. If we don't have any more questions coming in, we will sign off, and that way you can get this nice recording and share it with your colleagues or revisit it whenever you need some further guidance. And have a great evening, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you, Rachel and Tamara and Eric. I really appreciate it, and thank you to all of you for joining us. This is Carolyn Jacob. I'll keep
Well,
the
it's
chat
a
box
pleasure to be
open
here
for-
tonight.
Excuse me?
It was a pleasure to be here tonight.
Great, thank you. And I'll just keep the chat box open for another few seconds, and then we'll sign off and wish you a nice rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara and Eric and Carolyn, for all of the help. It was a great evening with you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.